Well, like, what's funny to you, John?
Well, I thought that scene was, I like to make people laugh at something that you would generally never laugh at in real life.
From feature films to Broadway musicals to books to even The Simpsons, there's no doubt somewhere in there you've heard the name John Waters. Baltimore's Prince of Puke has been a prominent figure in the film world since the 70s. His love of gimmicks, gore, and all things gross have thrown his name into the limelight, where he's remained since. Waters has 12 feature films under his belt, along with a few short films. His plots vary from sex addicts to angry mothers to, whatever Mondo Trasho was about. I had always known of him. I saw his cameos in The Simpsons and Drag Race, as well as just having, a general knowledge of pop culture. I knew of him. But in the summer of 2022, I decided to watch this supposedly disgusting film, Pink Flamingos. It was, in fact, disgusting. I remember my mind being blown. I couldn't understand it. Why would someone make this? What's the point? Why do I want to see it again? I became obsessed with needing to know more about him, his art, and its meaning. I decided this year I would dedicate a whole class to giving myself a history lesson on this man. Now join me as I drag you through the beautiful, gag-inducing, lunch-losing garbage heap that is John Waters.
I was angry maybe because no one would ever encourage my interest. I knew something was wrong from the beginning. Everything I was interested in, no one else ever was.
John Samuel Waters Jr. was born April 22nd, 1946, to Pat and John Waters Sr. Growing up in the Baltimore suburbs, Waters was always seen as an odd child, a little boy who idolized the Wicked Witch of the West and never understood why Dorothy wanted to go home. Growing up in a Catholic family, his unique interests were very noticeable. While he wasn't a delinquent, he was a loner. He would often tell his mother stories of a strange boy in school who only colored with black crayons and didn't speak to any of the other children. When his mother brought this up with his teacher, she replied, "That's your son." His love for films, specifically odd films, was evident from the beginning. During Sunday school, they would read out a list of films that had been condemned by the church, urging children to stay away from them. But, of course, this only intrigued Waters more, as he would write the names down and try to find their listings in the newspaper, which he would cut out to keep in his scrapbook to pretend he owned a dirty theater. As he got older, he became a wannabe beatnik. Him and his friends would shoplift and do drugs like they were hobbies. He began to find a love for many people who still inspire him to this day, like Kroger Babb, who made Mom and Dad, Federico Fellini, best known for 8½, and Russ Meyer, known for his work in the sexploitation field with Faster Pussycat, Kill Kill. All these people helped fuel the artistic flame that lived inside of him, but nobody poured more gas on that flame than William Castle. Castle was known for his theatricality and immersive tricks. He would go the extra mile for one good scare. During showings of his film The Tingler, which happens to be Waters' favorite, it follows people being killed by the tingle that runs up their spine when frightened. He had a device taped to the back of seats that would vibrate, simulating the monster on the screen. Of course, the only way to kill the tingler is to scream, so audiences would screech as the mechanical tingle rattled the room. These types of things were common practice with Castle, which Waters just ate up. This influence is one that Waters still cites as a landmark for him, saying he tries to emulate those moments in every film he makes, and that this was where he found the art in cinema. After years of admiring from afar, Waters decided to try his own hand at filmmaking. With a budget of $30 and a few friends, Waters created his first short film. Starring Mary Vivian Pearce and Mona Montgomery, Hag in a black leather jacket follows an interracial couple being led on a rooftop by a Ku Klux Klan member. The 17-minute short film has never been released publicly and has only been shown at select museum exhibits and galleries. No part of the film can be found anywhere on the internet, none of his short films can for that matter. But from what we've heard, maybe it isn't that big of a loss? An 18-year-old Waters had no idea editing was even a thing. He assumed what was filmed was the entire movie. I'm guessing he learned his lesson 3 years later when he made his next film. Roman Candles is made up of 3 films shown side by side. The footage shows Waters' friends like Mink Stoll, David Lochry, Malcolm Soule, Mary Vivian Pearce, and Divine, most of which would later become staple Dreamlanders, which I'll talk more about later, walking around town and just shoplifting. It takes heavy inspiration from Paul Morrissey and Andy Warhol's Chelsea Girls, which was released the year prior. While Morrissey and Warhol's racks in a whopping 3 hours and 30 minutes compared to Waters' 40, the inspiration is obvious. This wouldn't be the last time Morrissey and Warhol's style would be visible in his work. Eat Your Makeup, made in 1968, shows a couple, played by David Lochary and Malcolm Soule, who kidnaps young girls and forces them to eat their makeup and model themselves to death in front of them and their friends. One of which, played by Divine, envisions themselves as Jackie Kennedy and relives the JFK assassination, which didn't go over too well with crowds, as it was just 5 years after the actual event. Waters' only film to be uncompleted was 1968's Dorothy the Kansas City Pothead. With only 2 minutes of actual footage, the plot is essentially a mystery, but I mean, anyone could guess it's probably just a twisted retelling of the original story. With Pat Moran as Dorothy and Malcolm Soule as the Wicked Witch, the project quickly fell into the ground as Waters realized it was impossible to make a lip-sync sound film with only a camera and a tape recorder. This realization didn't stop Waters from making headlines, though. The film got him an article in the Baltimore Sun which read, "The Wizard of Oz goes to pot." While the reporter had come to watch the making of the movie, Waters didn't even have film in his camera. All of these films were directed, written, produced, shot, and edited by Waters himself, which gives us a real look into the artistic mind of his younger being. Or it would, if we could see any of them. While these films have all been locked away in the vaults, only to be seen by those lucky enough to encounter a showing, even through just the descriptions you can see Waters' staple, unsettling, and odd plots. Many reviews state that his chaotic, loosely plotted filmmaking is shown, albeit in a much more raw sense, throughout. These tendencies feature heavily in his earlier films, but remain throughout his entire career. Alliterated names, brighter, larger-than-life color palettes, vomit, but none make his movies as unique as the Dreamlanders. I know I've tossed that word around a few times, Dreamland or Dreamlanders, but who are they? What is a Dreamland? Dreamland Productions is the name of John Waters' production company, which has been around since the beginning. The Dreamlanders are Waters' friends who frequently appear in his films. They make up the majority of Waters' early cast lists and still appear in some later works. While many have come and gone, here are the main players.
Hey, lady! Have some chips?
Really, I couldn't. Thanks, but no thanks.
Ming Stoll and Mary Vivian Pierce. Stoll and Pierce are the only Dreamlanders to have been in every John Waters movie to date. But Stoll has acted outside of them as well. You've probably seen her in other cult classics like But I'm a Cheerleader, Lost Highway, or Gregor Aki's Splendor. She also had a column in the Baltimore City paper and a band called Ming Stoll and Her Wonderful Band. There's much less information out there on Mary Vivian Pierce. She's only worked in John Waters films and hasn't done much publicly outside of that.
Dinner served! I'm really not that hungry.
Susan Lowe. Lowe has appeared in all except 2 of Waters' films and has not expanded into Hollywood. Lowe mostly plays minor roles, with the exception of the lead in Desperate Living.
Mr. Weinberger, Dawn Davenport is eating a meatball sandwich right out in class, and she's been passing notes.
I was not eating.
I got a knife here in my pocketbook, and I'm gonna cut you up after class.
Cookie Mueller. Mueller appeared in 5 of Waters' films, from Multiple Maniacs onward. She was a bit of a celebrity in the New York downtown scene. Another notable movie she was in was Downtown 81, starring Jean-Michel Basquiat, which, if you haven't seen, is an incredible film, and you should see it at least once in your life. It's a perfect descriptor of downtown 1980s New York. It's really beautiful. Anyways, she was a journalist and writer outside of acting as well. Her last appearance was in Polyester before she unfortunately passed away in 1989 due to AIDS-related pneumonia. Despite her small roles, she is a staple in Waters' filmography. While being hospitalized for pelvic inflammatory disease, she was visited by Waters and Stoll. When she was asked what happened, she replied, "Just a little female trouble, hun," which gave Waters the title for his 3rd feature film.
This isn't any cheap X-rated movie or any fifth-rate porno play. This is the show you want. Lady Divine's Cavalcade of Perversions, the sleaziest show on earth. Not actors, not paid imposters, but real, actual filth.
David Lochary. Lochary appeared in 4 of Waters' films, from Mondo Trasho to Female Trouble. Next to acting, Lochary also frequently worked on hair and makeup in the films. He's the one who introduced Divine to the idea of drag. He passed away in 1977 due to blood loss while slicing himself with a mirror shard while high on PCP.
Look at this dress, Francine! Isn't it ra-sha-sha?
Edith Massey. Massey starred in 5 of Waters' movies before her death. While she didn't act much outside of that, throughout her life she worked many, many jobs. She owned multiple thrift stores, sang in a punk band, worked as a bartender, and had so much other weird shit like that. She's arguably one of the most recognizable Dreamlanders, as her signature delivery is just unforgettable.
The world of heterosexual is a sick and boring life.
Sadly, she lost her life due to complications of lymphoma and diabetes in 1984.
Malcolm Soul was my first star. I mean, she was the most influential woman on me. She was sort of the Kiki of Baltimore.
Now, I know I said I'd be talking about the main players, and technically Malcolm Soul hasn't been seen in any films, as she's only in Waters' short films that I talked about previously, but I feel like I should talk about her. Many describe her as the beatnik princess of Baltimore. She was a big figurehead in the underground beatnik Baltimore scene, and was a real inspiration and a muse for John Waters in his earlier days. She was known for her recognizable makeup and just this absolute star power. When she'd walk into a room, everyone would see. Even Divine was in awe of her, they say. There's a fantastic 10-minute video out there about her. Pat Moran and Susan Lowe and a few other people discuss her presence in Baltimore, and how important she was, despite passing away at such a young age. She passed away at 28 due to a drug overdose, but she was just an absolute star, and I feel like more people need to know about her, so that's why I thought I'd throw her in.
Could you give us some of your political beliefs?
Kill everyone now. Condone first-degree murder. Advocate cannibalism. Eat shit.
The most recognizable Dreamlander by a mile, Divine starred in all but one of Waters' films leading up to his death. Growing up, Harris Glenn Milstead lived just down the road from Waters, but didn't get to know him until high school. Developing an interest in drag in beauty school through friend David Lockery, he began to take on female roles in Waters' movies. Milstead was given the name of Divine, along with the tagline of the most beautiful woman in the world, almost. Throughout his career, Divine released albums as well as acting outside of Waters' films. Divine has been named Drag Queen of the Century by People magazine and remains a queer icon to this day. There's a ton of documentaries out there that talk more about her exclusively if you want to learn more. I really would recommend checking out a couple of them. There's one on Tubi in Canada for sure called I Am Divine. While the quality isn't great, the information's all there, and it shows just how impactful he was to the people around him, and how impactful he was on drag and culture today. While there are many names on the Dreamland roster, those are the most known and notable of the bunch. Now that you've been caught up to speed, let's jump into Waters' first feature film. The 95-minute feature follows an unnamed character many have dubbed the Bombshell, who is struck by a car driven by Divine. From there, the unconscious Bombshell and her get into various odd situations around Baltimore, including being placed in a psych ward, multiple visits from the Virgin Mary, and a doctor who cuts the Bombshell's feet off and replaces them with that of a bird's, which she can click together like red ruby slippers to be transported all around Baltimore. The vague narrative that's boosted by a series of nonsensical scenarios laid on top of a soundtrack that's been recorded straight from a vinyl record, it's almost overwhelming. Waters has stated that he isn't super proud of this film and that it should have been a short film instead, and honestly I'm inclined to agree. While it has its standout moments, it's nowhere near Waters' best, but was a necessary stepping stone to further his career. While the dialogue is minimal, all audio including the soundtrack was recorded in post-production. The technical oddities give the audio a very uneasy feeling. This is also found in the dialogue, which feels very Uncanny Valley-ish, sounding human, but not quite. This comes from many places. The quality, the unsync with the video, it's not quite timed correctly, the shots, the delivery, and the words themselves. Waters' dialogue tends to have a formality about it, yet is played almost completely blank-faced or over-exaggerated. With the Dreamlanders, there's no in-between. All Waters is written dialogue, which all of it is written. He doesn't like actors improvising. All of it has this quality. It's just much more evident here. Let me show you an example.
Oh, Mary. Oh, Mary. Oh, Holy Trinity. Oh, God. It isn't easy being divine.
As Divine kneels in front of the Virgin Mary, begging and pleading for forgiveness, her words sound panicked and begging, while her face goes from big, exaggerated expressions to subtle. Waters doesn't try to match the mouth to the words. instead choosing for the track to resemble almost a disembodied voice, which is off-putting. The long shots make you wonder if there was an editing mistake because, there's no way we're supposed to look at her for this long. The whole shot feels like a fever dream. The whole movie feels like a fever dream. When Waters came onto the film scene, no genre accepted his art. He was too bizarre for the mainstream, too funny for sexploitation or grindhouse, too filthy to be avant-garde. So where did he fit in?
We go against this grain and live for truth. The ugly fucking truth.
Transgressive Cinema is a movie that began in the 1970s, which combines elements of exploitation, Italian neorealism, experimental film, and European art cinema, becoming a big ball of DIY avant-garde, working-class sexploitation.
We will be the end of life on this planet!
Nick Zedd, in particular, began using this term consistently in the 1980s, publishing a manifesto which began a movement called the Cinema of Transgression. It exists to make people uncomfortable and angry, made as a way to push societal norms and break many rules that still exist in our culture today. Waters' next creative effort came in the form of Multiple Maniacs. The film follows Lady Divine and her cavalcade of perversions, which is a cover used to rob the rich who come to see the show. When Lady Divine's boyfriend, played by David Lochary, begins cheating and plotting to murder Lady Divine, Divine decides to get him first. But, of course, it's not that easy. Throughout her journey, many violent acts occur, assault, among other things, which leads her to find solace in the church, where more sex acts are held. She later returns to her apartment, where she finds her boyfriend and his mistress waiting to pull the trigger. Lady Divine manages to overpower them, though this victory is short-lived as she is quickly assaulted again, this time by a 15-foot lobster. This causes her to snap as she begins wandering down the streets, raging and foaming at the mouth before being stopped by police. Many words have been used to describe Waters' movies, especially earlier works, things like filthy, violent, bizarre, and offensive. While these can be used to describe anything he's done, he often ends up focusing on one in particular. Mondo Trasho focuses on confusion, Pink Flamingos focuses on filth, and Multiple Maniacs focuses on perversion and violence. Made in 1970, the film premiered at the height of the hippie movement, when peace and love was all the rage. It was built to shock and disgust people by shoving violence in their face for an hour and a half. This is Waters' most violent film to date, featuring murder, sexual assault, cannibalism, and just so much murder. Waters' use of style as terrorism is perfectly done here. Fun fact, in the film, Lady Divine tries to convince her boyfriend David that he was responsible for the Sharon Tate murders. It would later be implied that it's actually Divine. However, this was written out, mostly, when Charles Manson was caught. Like his other films, this one was shown on a tour throughout major cities in the US, shown in art house theaters, and driven state to state by Waters himself. There wasn't one specific theater that housed these types of movies, no place for things like this that thrived on the odd and disturbing like these. Well, that wasn't until December of 1970. In the late 1970s, a showing of Alexander Jorodowski's El Topo played at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. The owner of the Elgin Theater, Ben Barenholtz, attended and saw person after person walk out mid-movie while he found himself enthralled. After many different attempts to get a hold of the movie, he convinced the producers of the film to do late-night screenings. The showings began around midnight on weekdays and 1 a.m. on weekends. The film began to grow an audience of people who really appreciated and understood the film. This began the trend of the midnight movie. Many theaters in Manhattan began to follow, showing soon-to-be classics that didn't come with your typical daytime audience. Films like Night of the Living Dead, The Harder They Come, and, most relevant, John Waters' Pink Flamingos.
Oh, well, everybody's heard about the bird. The bird's a winner.
As the birth of the dubbed Trash Trilogy, Waters' next movie was put out in the midst of a big change. Pornography was becoming legal. Exploitation was no longer pushing boundaries. So Waters had to find something else to make people's skin crawl. Pink Flamingos was the film that put Waters on the map. Known as a movie that had to hand out puke bags at every showing, one who shocked and disgusted anyone who walked through their doors. A true exercise in poor taste. The movie was created to disgust, and it delivers. I won't go too into detail because if you haven't seen it, you need to be shocked, but it features gluttony, rape, incest, murder, cannibalism, castration, and more, and is topped off with what is probably its most infamous scene, the dog poop scene. For the final scene of the film, John Waters asked Divine if she would eat actual dog feces, to which she said yes. So she did. And the shock and buzz from this absolutely filthy film drove Waters and Divine to headlines. This film, despite being released over 50 years ago, still has the uncanny ability to disgust and surprise. The film, Waters, and Divine are still a massive part of queer history. In 2021, Pink Flamingos was placed in the United States National Film Registry because of its cultural significance. Fun fact, this is the only film that Waters ever tried to make a sequel for. The sequel, titled Flamingos Forever, was written in the early 80s, but was canceled after Divine turned down the role and Edith Massey passed away. You can still find the script, though. Waters published it in 1988 alongside the script for Desperate Living, and of course, Pink Flamingos. Despite the large impact it had, it never has been, and is still by no means, a popular film. Rather, it has taken on the title most midnight movies have, cult classic.
So a cult movie,
my definition of a cult film is...
I would think a cult film would be...
I think a cult movie is a movie that...
The term cult classic is thrown around a lot these days, and honestly, the definition is almost subjective at this point. The only criteria is that the film must have developed a cult following. That's really it. The original meaning focused more on box office flops, unique art films, and more obscure underground works. Films that were controversial or were so bad they're good were also contenders. The modern use of the term has made it practically useless, as it's now used as a way to describe anything different or odd. Like when reviews will call a new release an instant cult classic, which doesn't make any sense. It obviously can't have a fan base before it's out. Let me show you what I mean. Okay. On Wikipedia, in the cult movies list, if you click on just the letter P, you can find, Paris is Burning, Possession, makes sense. Oh, Pitch Perfect. And my personal favorite, Greg Milata's masterpiece, 2011's Paul. As you can tell, I've defined it to the best of my ability, but it's an impossible task with the way the term is used nowadays.
I got lots of problems.
Where do these people come from? Where do they go when the sun goes down? Isn't there a law or something? That's a direct quote from Louisiana film critic Rex Reed, straight from his review of Female Trouble. In 1974, John Waters released Female Trouble. The film surrounds the life of Dawn Davenport, from troubled teen to convicted criminal. Through her husband's bosses, Dawn finds herself as the lead test subject in an experiment to prove that beauty and crime are the same. That the more crimes committed, the more beautiful a person would be. Dawn becomes obsessed with the concept of beauty and crime, so much so that she finds herself at her most beautiful as she's placed in the electric chair waiting for the lever to be pulled. Throughout his filmography, Waters thrives on exaggeration. Waters takes the societal norms and presents it to you turned up to 11. Usually white picket fence, American dream type people, and what's more American than toxic beauty standards. Throughout Female Trouble, Waters satirizes the concept of beauty standards by showing how far a hunger for beauty can take us, and how irrational we can become. While I don't think many of us would go as far as Dawn does, the point still stands. People will do anything to be perceived as beautiful. While Female Trouble is often called one of his best, Waters' next effort would go down as one of his worst. 1977's Desperate Living follows a mentally ill woman and her maid who, after killing her husband, run away to a homeless town called Mortville. That's ruled by an evil queen. While it has come back into favor with the public recently, initially it was disliked by many, and I'll get into why in a moment, but it's still overshadowed by his earlier stuff, which is a damn shame for many reasons, but mainly because of the absolutely top-notch performances. Now, I'll be honest, the film itself is definitely on the lower end of my Waters ranking, as you can see here. You should probably follow me on Letterboxd, by the way, at @GeorgiaTommel_. But it has some of the best performances of his entire filmography. Liz Renee and Susan Lowe have such an extremely odd magnetic chemistry that I can't even describe it correctly, really. Edith Massey is... Well, Edith Massey, and she's never had a bad performance in her life. Jean Hill has a captivating on-screen debut that made me disappointed at her few IMDb credits, but nothing, and I mean nothing, can top Mink Stoll. Mink Stoll plays Peggy Gravel, a paranoid wife who enters a mental episode from the very top of the film. Right from the first scene, Stoll has it cranked as high as she can go. The over-exaggeration of the paranoid damsel is done in a way that feels so inherently Waters that no one could have done as well as she did. Watch this clip from the opening scene and I'll show you what I mean.
It's like war. Don't tell me I don't know what Vietnam is like. Rats! Rats! Rats!
Oh, Mom! Oh, I'm sorry, Mrs. Granville. I'll pay for the window out of my allowance.
How about my life? Do you get enough allowance to pay for that? I know you were trying to kill me. What's the matter with the courts? Do they allow this lawlessness and malicious destruction of property to run rampant? I hate the Supreme Court!
Now, there are many elements that really make this performance. First and foremost, she believes it. In order to make this style of exaggerating over-the-top character work, the actor must remain grounded no matter how absurd things get. You can see through everything else that I will talk about that Stoll believes through and through that these children are out to get her and that she is being put in danger by the world around her. Because of this, she is able to extend belief into making particular attributes more cartoonish. The flailing, helpless movements, including the unmissable limp, the unbreaking wide-eyed stare, the heavy breathing, and the hoarse voice. One of the biggest, though, is the choice of scream. Rather than your typical woman in distress, high-pitched scream, Stoll uses a guttural one. This often reflects exhaustion and anger as well as fear. This is only cemented by the hoarse voice she carries throughout a large chunk of the movie, proving that she has been feeling these emotions and has been yelling about them for a long time. These types of performances are very common in Waters' work, using these elements to create the foundation of many characters we know and love. There's just something that's so special about this one, and I really hope Mink Stoll is proud. This is a performance to remember, and one of her best in her entire career. Unfortunately, the film as a whole was not well liked by many who like the rest of Waters' filmography, and in my opinion, it seems like a perfect storm. It was made in an odd time in Waters' career when he was growing in his technique and evolving, but was stuck in the low-budget midnight movie bubble. It also stirred up controversy with its portrayal of lesbians, which has now completely flipped on its head as it's often beloved by the groups that once condemned it. As well as, it was Waters' first film without Divine, who could not appear due to prior commitments. Again, I completely understand most of the criticism that comes at this film, but I feel it has some charm that many weren't seeing until now. But the late 70s featured more than one big change for Waters.
On the day I went away.
With every climbing and rising trend, there's always a fall. In the same year as Desperate Living, one of the last milestone midnight movies began premiering at the Cinema Theater in New York, David Lynch's Eraserhead. The trend began to plateau and dip soon after. With the rise of home video, smaller independent theaters began to close, and with them went the midnight movie. While some showings of films remained, it became harder and harder to draw in a crowd when they could just pop into VHS instead. With this extreme cultural shift, Waters would have to rethink his next steps. His previous shockingly disgusting films wouldn't be the same when not enjoyed in a room full of other, equally disgusted people. Therefore, a new type of Waters film was born.
See the houses.
1981's Polyester was Waters' first film to not be solely produced by Dreamland Productions. Both Michael White Productions and New Line Cinema are credited on the project. This must have been an odd culture shock to Waters, as his budget jumped from $65,000 to $300,000. This film sees the return of Divine, this time as Francine Fishpaw, a neglected housewife whose whole family is falling apart as she desperately tries to keep them together. Her husband, who owns a pornographic theater, cheats, then leaves her. Her daughter Lulu gets pregnant, and her son Dexter is found out to be the town's latest criminal, the Baltimore Footstopper. The film focuses on the satirization of women's dramas and romance movies. It takes a drastic step away from downright visible filth while maintaining its core elements. It feels like a Waters film, just one made for a wider audience. This was cemented by the casting of Tab Hunter as Francine's love interest, Todd Tomorrow. Tab Hunter was a heartthrob in the 50s and 60s, starring in many films through that time. After leaving the business for just over a decade, he made a return to acting for this film. This was Waters' first time having such a big name in his cast list, and this helped gain Polyester some buzz before it had even premiered. This also marked a new beginning for Waters, who would later open the Dreamlanders family to more and more famous faces down the line. Hunter's involvement was a really big deal at the time. Seeing a straight former heartthrob falling in love with a plus-size drag queen was insane to most. Fun fact, the film also included an odorama card with every viewing. It was a scratch and sniff card that corresponded with numbers on the screen, allowing the viewers to smell what was shown in the movie. These were included in the Criterion Collection's re-release, and I am proud to say that I own one. It really does elevate the film. While this film had some success and began to garner Waters some mainstream recognition, the next one would be even bigger.
Hey girl, what you doing over there? Can't you see? I'm spraying my hair.
It almost saddens me how many people don't know that the 8-time Tony Award-winning Broadway play and hit movie musical Hairspray was originally a John Waters film. Released in 1988, the story, set in the early 60s, follows Tracy Turnblad, a plump teenager whose obsession with dancing leads her to protesting racial segregation. The film itself drops the filth and disgust for an honest social commentary, still told in Waters' own style. His signatures are there, it's just wrapped in a more mass-appealing package. The film was rated PG by the MPAA, which would be a first for Waters, as most of his previous work was rated X or R. He also keeps his tradition of finding unknowns for leading roles with Ricky Lake, who debuted as Tracy. Many big names appear in the film, like Debbie Harry, Sonny Bono, Jerry Stiller, and legendary R&B artist Ruth Brown, who played Motormouth Mayo. Shockingly though, only 3 of the Dreamlanders appear. Divine playing Edna Turnblad, Tracy's mom, Mink Stoll playing Corny Collins' assistant, and Mary Vivian Pierce, whose role was ultimately cut out of the film. It became Waters' first mainstream hit, winning over critics everywhere and grossing $8.2 million after its theatrical run. Waters was on top of the world as his film became the talk of the town. Though this joy was short-lived, as just 9 days after the film's wide release, Waters' life would change forever.
Because when you think of a blonde bombshell, you think of Monroe or Mansfield or those very shapely women. You don't think of a 300-pound man.
On March 7th of 1988, Divine was late to his first day on set of Married with Children. He had been cast as an uncle character on the show, which would mark the first time Divine had a major role playing a man. Being late was very out of the ordinary for Divine, so after a few hours his manager went to the Regency Plaza Suites Hotel, where he was staying. It was there that he had discovered that Divine had passed away. Divine died of heart failure at the age of 42 in his sleep the night before. The loss of Waters' close childhood friend and longtime collaborator shook him to his core. Waters, to this day, says he cannot believe Divine is gone.
Do what, 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 do what.
Waters describes 1990's Crybaby as his only true Hollywood film. The story follows 2 rival groups in 1950s Baltimore, the Drapes, who were the delinquents, and the Squares, who were the rich, good kids. Through their rivalry blossoms a Romeo and Juliet-esque love. It comes through as Waters' most straight work, featuring practically 0 queer elements, which was odd for Waters. It's also his only musical. Waters always made original songs for his film and incorporated music into plots, but Crybaby is the only actual musical in his resume. While it managed to contain the look of a mainstream film, upon viewing, you can clearly see the Waters of it all. The characters and dialogue feel like his work put through a filter, more severe than Hairspray and Polyester, which, I mean, makes sense after the success of Hairspray. Unfortunately, it did not find that same fame. At a budget of $12 million, it made $8.3. Waters was given one more chance with a large budget, and I mean, thank God he was. 1994's Serial Mom follows Beverly Sutphin, a stay-at-home mother whose life is seemingly perfect. That life is quickly interrupted by her own murderous rage. This rage causes her to murder anyone who angers or inconveniences her. The entire community becomes aware of her guilt when she gets into a police chase before being caught and tried before a judge and jury. She manages to win over the jury and get away scot-free. Well, till a juror wears white after Labor Day. Serial Mom marks Waters' return to his own. Kathleen Turner's performance slides perfectly into that Dreamlander style that I spoke about with Desperate Living. The unspoken absurdity reminds the viewer that Waters is still behind the wheel. This film frames itself as a suburban teen family comedy and keeps it up throughout. It makes it feel as though Beverly isn't just trying to convince the characters, but the viewer that she and her family are normal. Pecker follows the title character, who is a young photographer. As his photographs begin to make him and his middle-class family and friends famous, his fame begins to ruin all his loved ones' lives. Some of the later works in Waters' resume feel like responses or direct spins on trends at the time. Pecker feels like John Waters does John Hughes. It's a feel-good film and a love letter to Baltimore doused head to toe in Waters' signature. You guessed it, filth. It also marks Waters' return to a lower budget, going from $13 million to $6 million, and you can tell. It feels more grimy and less manufactured. And it taps into something that becomes more and more apparent the further you go down his filmography. Waters' main characters are often inspired by himself. While Pecker is definitely the most obvious example, leads from Tracy Turnblad to Cecil B. Demented have pieces of Waters in them. But Pecker is close enough to feel like an autobiography. A young man making his art, using real people and what tools he could find to make something beautiful. His art then becomes mainstream. Those once normal people are thrown under a microscope. People begin to try and change and mold his art in the way they want, but in the end, he knows that Baltimore and its charm is where he belongs and where his art can thrive, with a little help from the mainstream along the way. While Waters has stated that Pecker is not an exact retelling of his life, it's clear he took from his own experiences. Waters' next effort was based in the progressive loss of art in the film world. Real indie films had begun their descent into obscurity, and Waters, having come up in the underground film world, had something to say. A-lister Honey Whitlock, played by Melanie Griffith, appears at the premiere of her new movie, Some Kind of Happiness. As she gives a speech, Cecil B. Demented and his crew of menacing runaway art kids kidnap her and force her to be a part of their guerrilla warfare on the film industry. They begin an attack on the town through their film, dragging along a scared Honey. The attack culminates in a standoff at the drive-in, where Honey accepts her role in the attack against cinema and lights her own hair on fire in protest. 2 decades after its premiere, its commentary on the film industry has only become more accurate. With today's love of franchises and sequels, we've lost the originality and creativity that comes with independent features. Even the term itself, indie, has become misused. The term's real meaning describes a movie that was created independently from a production studio or any big-budget names. They often have a small crew, a low budget, and tackle heavy or controversial topics. The word has developed a new meaning in the past 5 years, as people now describe indie films as anything slightly original or anything with A24's name on it. I won't go too into detail with this one, but trust me, this is Waters' return to true, unfiltered him. It seems like a response, or Waters' take on the raunchy sex comedies of the early 2000s. Sylvia Stickles is stuck in a sexless marriage until she gets a concussion in a car accident which gives her a sex addiction. She joins Johnny Knoxville's character's sex cult and slowly takes over the town. The film was actually kind of funny and much better than expected. Tracy Ullman kills it with her physical comedy, but there's something about it that I can't quite put my finger on, and I found myself kind of dwelling on it. While all his work seems weird or off-putting just for the sake of it, there's always some heart behind it, but this one just feels void. Like there's something about it that just feels hollow, that I can't even really place. I feel like Waters' take on these trends usually come with a bit of, a more satirical look into it, which I suppose it has through its over-exaggeration, but The comedies of the 2000s that I feel Waters is not necessarily parodying, but putting his take on it, those comedies are already so exaggerated that, you know, exaggerating them more doesn't really do anything. Maybe I just didn't get the film, but like, it's not his best. Shockingly enough, it was not well received. The NC-17 rating given by the MPAA killed the box office and DVD sales, making $1.5 million with a $15 million budget. Sometimes, you know, John just isn't meant for the mainstream.
As far as having any socially redeeming value, I hope I don't have any.
Waters hasn't directed since A Dirty Shame, but he has had some projects that never got off the ground. In 2007, Waters wrote Fruitcake, a children's Christmas adventure. It was intended to begin filming in 2008 with Johnny Knoxville and Parker Posey attached, but was killed in January of 2009. It was most likely due to the financial recession and box office numbers of his last few films, but it will be missed. Well, as of 2019 and 2020, Waters still believes in the film and is trying to get it made. Though in the meantime, he has kept himself busy. As well as helping craft 2 Broadway musicals, Waters has written books, had small acting roles and cameos, led talks, toured with many things including a stand-up special, held summer camps, hosted music festivals, and delved into the art world. He's always been an avid collector, but he creates his own work as well. My personal favorite piece of his being Hardy Har, which features a portrait of a flower with a line of tape on the floor. When the line of tape is crossed, the water squirts from the center of a flower. I don't care. That's peak comedy for me. In 2022, it was announced that he would be getting a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, as well as an exhibit at the Academy Museum of Motion Pictures. Later that year, Deadline reported his return to directing is in the works. An adaptation of his 2022 novel Liarmouth is in production, and I, among many others, am very excited. In my opinion, A Dirty Shame wasn't exactly a worthy send-off for the Prince of Puke. The evolution of John Waters is an obvious one. With more and more experience in the field, his work became more polished and higher quality in the technical side of things. Along with a higher budget, more notable in an ever-changing cast, and overlooking studios critiquing and changing things. Not to mention the difference in his writing, which became more and more flexible. With no secure cast lists, as the Dreamlanders began to disperse, Waters became unable to write for specific people. Evolution and changes aside, the signatures mentioned never really left. Even in his most Hollywood films, you can still feel his presence and artistry. Even as the cast list changed, most of the actors still deliver performances that complement the uncanny valley feeling mentioned earlier. They remain violent and filthy, a way to laugh at our own expectations and values, and a good way to piss people off. Hopefully, for the greater good, his work stays that way. Artists like Waters, who are able to push the norm and create pieces of work that follow their own vision, are more needed now than ever. With the rise of homophobia, transphobia, and misogyny in the world, we need someone with Waters' honesty and humor. With the following that Waters has, it's shown that artists like these have a home, even if they don't necessarily need one. He's become a staple in the world of queer cinema and cinema in general. He's survived as a cockroach of culture, rising occasionally to cause fear and confusion before retreating and beginning his next big work that will shock us all. No matter what happens in this world, we can always count on that cockroach, laying among the garbage, waiting to emerge to tell us to go fuck ourselves.